Before I tell you what happened that morning, before I describe the thunder of hooves that wasn't cattle, the scream that wasn't wind, the way my coffee cup shattered against the porch boards and I didn't even notice, I need you to understand something about silence. Out here in the high desert of the Sonoran, silence isn't empty. It's full. Full of things that are about to happen. Full of warnings your blood understands before your mind does. Full of the weight of ground that's been walked by people who knew this land better than any survey map, better than any deed, better than me with my barbed wire and my windmill and my foolish certainty that I owned any of it. I'd been on that ranch for 11 years when she came. 11 years of mending fence, digging post holes, watching the sky for rain that might not come. 11 years of thinking I'd earned my place. 11 years of believing the land had accepted me. I was wrong. The morning started like any other. I'd been sitting on my porch, watching the sun bleed over the Catalina Mountains, that particular shade of rose and gold that makes a man believe in something bigger than himself. My coffee was hot, my boots were off, and I was thinking about nothing more complicated than whether to fix the south pasture gate before or after lunch. Then the ground started to hum. Not like an earthquake, not like cattle stamping. It was a vibration that came up through the porch boards, through the soles of my feet, through the bones in my legs. Something ancient and urgent, something that made the horses in the corral start to whicker and pace. And then I heard her. The scream wasn't human, not entirely. It was part horse, part terror, part something that had been ripped out of a throat that had no more words left. I was on my feet before I knew I'd moved, coffee cup forgotten, heart hammering against my ribs like it wanted out. She burst through the mesquite at the edge of my property like she'd been fired from a cannon. Bareback on a paint horse that was lathered to foam, its eyes rolling white, its breath coming in ragged gasps. Her hair was black and wild, streaming behind her like a banner. Her face, I couldn't see her face clearly, not yet, but I could see her hands. White-knuckled, gripping the horse's mane, her knuckles bone pale against the dark hide. Behind her, maybe a quarter-mile back, I saw the dust. Not just dust, purposeful dust. The kind that comes from horses moving fast with riders who know exactly where they're going. And I heard it too. That sound that no cowboy ever forgets. The sound of pursuit. She was running from something, running for her life. The paint stumbled as she urged it toward the barn, and I saw her body lurch forward, almost losing her seat. She recovered with a grace that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle, but I saw the blood then, a dark streak down her left arm, soaking into the sleeve of her cotton dress. Saw the way her mouth was open, gasping, her eyes wide, and fixed on something I couldn't see. On me. She was looking at me, and in that moment I understood something with a clarity that would haunt me for years. I was her only chance. I didn't think. I didn't consider the consequences, the laws, the right or wrong of it. I just moved. Because that's what you do when a terrified girl bursts across your land with blood on her arm and death on her heels. You move. You help. You ask questions later if there is a later. Now I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking about the history, the wars, the generations of blood and pain and broken promises. You're thinking about a white rancher and an Apache girl and all the ways that story has been told before, usually wrong, usually ugly. But this isn't that story. Or maybe it is, just not the way you expect. This is a story about what happens when a man who thought he knew himself meets a girl who knows exactly who she is. About what happens when you're forced to choose between everything you thought you believed and everything you suddenly know is true. This is the story of how an Apache girl burst across my land in terror, and how nothing on that ranch was ever the same again. The dust was closer now. I could hear the shouts, guttural, angry, unmistakably hostile, men's voices, rough with the kind of purpose that meant nothing good, and beneath the shouts the drumbeat of hooves, too many hooves. I reached the girl as she slid off her horse, her legs nearly buckling beneath her. Up close, I saw what the distance had hidden. She was young, maybe 16, maybe 17. Her face was streaked with dust and sweat and tears, but her eyes were something else entirely. They were the color of flint, hard and sharp and burning with a defiance that made my breath catch. Even now, even bleeding and terrified, she looked at me like she was deciding whether I was prey or predator. "I'm not going to hurt you," I said, my voice coming out rougher than I'd intended. I held up my hands, palms out, the way you'd approach a wounded animal. "I'm going to help you." She said something in a language I didn't understand. Her voice was thin, reedy, but there was steel underneath it. She gestured frantically toward the approaching dust cloud. "I know," I said. "I see them, come on." I grabbed her arm gently, carefully, and pulled her toward the barn. She resisted for a moment, her body tensing like a drawn bowstring, then she seemed to make a decision and came with me. Her horse tried to follow, but I shoved it toward the corral. "Get out of sight," I hissed. "Go." The horse, bless its animal heart, understood. It scrambled toward the cover of the cottonwoods behind the barn as I dragged the girl inside. The barn smelled like hay and dust and horses and sweat, that familiar smell of my life, my work, my everything. But now it smelled like fear, too, her fear, and underneath it something else. Blood. Her blood had soaked through her sleeve and was dripping onto the dirt floor. "Here," I said, pushing her into an empty stall. "Stay down, don't make a sound." She stared at me, those flint-colored eyes boring into mine. For a moment I thought she was going to argue, to fight, to do something that would get us both killed. Then she nodded, a sharp, jerky motion, and dropped to the ground. She curled herself into the corner of the stall, pulling her knees to her chest, making herself as small as possible. In her other hand I saw a knife. Small, practical, the kind you'd use to cut rope or clean game. But the way she held it told me she knew how to use it for other things. I stepped out of the stall and pulled the door mostly closed, leaving a crack to see through. Then I walked to the barn entrance, trying to look casual, trying to slow my racing heart. They came in a cloud of dust and fury. Half a dozen men on horseback, their faces hard and red with exertion. White men, all of them, rough-looking, armed to the teeth. They reined in hard at the edge of my yard, their horses prancing and snorting. "You rancher." The man doing the shouting was big, broad-shouldered, with a beard that hadn't seen a razor in weeks. He had a rifle across his saddle and a look in his eyes that I recognized. He'd been drinking, yes, but that wasn't the worst of it. He was hungry, hungry for something I didn't want to think about. "She come through here," he snarled. "Apache girl, saw her head this way, you seen her." I felt my heart stop for a beat, then start again, too fast, too loud. I forced myself to breathe, forced myself to think. Stall. That's what I had to do. Stall for time until they gave up and moved on. "Seen a lot of things this morning," I said, my voice coming out calm and easy. I leaned against the barn door frame, arms crossed, the picture of a man with nothing to hide. "Coyotes, jackrabbits. A hawk took a chicken right out of my yard. You're going to have to be more specific." The man's eyes narrowed. "Don't play games with me, rancher. She's a thief. Stole from my camp last night. We've been tracking her since dawn." "Stole what?" "Doesn't matter what, she's an Apache. That's enough." I wanted to argue with that. Wanted to point out that stealing from a camp didn't justify a posse of 6 armed men chasing a teenage girl across the desert. But I knew better. I knew the kind of men these were. The kind who saw an Apache and didn't think person. They thought problem. They thought target. And right now, that target was hiding in my barn, bleeding onto my floor. "I haven't seen any Apache," I said. "Not this morning. Had a few come through last week trading, but they moved on." The man spat into the dirt. "She's close. I can feel it." He looked at the barn, his eyes lingering on the dark opening. "Mind if we take a look around?" My blood turned to ice. "I do mind, actually. Got a mare and they're ready to foal. Spooked her once this morning and she nearly aborted. I'm not having a bunch of armed men banging around and losing me $1,000 foal." That was a lie. My mare wasn't due for another month, but it was the kind of lie these men would understand. The kind that spoke to money, to practicality, to the things that mattered to men like them. The bearded man stared at me for a long, uncomfortable moment. I stared back, willing myself not to blink, not to look away, not to give him any reason to doubt me. Finally, he grunted, "We'll check the perimeter, if you're lying to me, rancher." "You won't have to worry about that," I said, "because I'm not." They turned their horses and rode off, circling my property, kicking up more dust. I watched them go, counting the seconds until they were out of sight. My hands were shaking. My whole body was shaking. I had just lied to a group of armed men who would have killed me without a second thought if they'd known what I was hiding. And I didn't care. I didn't care at all. When I was sure they were gone, I went back to the stall and opened the door. The girl was still there, still curled in the corner, still clutching that knife. Her eyes were wide, watching me, waiting for me to make the next move. "They're gone," I said. "For now. They might come back, but you're safe here for now." She didn't relax. If anything, she got tenser. I realized she was shaking, her whole body trembling like a leaf in a windstorm. And I realized, too, that her arm was still bleeding. "You need to let me look at that," I said. "I've got a medical kit in the house. Antibiotic bandages." She shook her head, violently, spat out a string of words in that language I didn't understand. I caught one of them, though. It sounded like a name. Her name, maybe. "Mescal," she said, pointing at herself. "Mescal." "Mescal," I repeated. "That's your name." She nodded, still watching me warily. "I'm Daniel," I said. "Daniel Hartwell. This is my ranch." She said something else, something I couldn't understand. Her voice cracked on the last word, and I saw tears start to well in those flinty eyes. She blinked them away furiously, ashamed to be crying in front of me. "It's okay," I said softly. "It's okay to be scared. You're safe now." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. She wasn't safe. Not really. Not as long as there were men out there who wanted to hurt her. Not as long as she was alone and wounded and miles from anyone who could help her. Not as long as I was just a rancher with a small house and no idea what to do next. I didn't know where she'd come from. I didn't know what she'd done or what had been done to her. I didn't know anything about her people or her life or why she'd run so far and so fast. But I knew one thing. When a terrified girl bursts across your land with blood on her arm and death on her heels, you don't turn her away. You don't hand her over. You don't let her be another name on a list of tragedies. You help her, whatever it takes. And that's what I did. Over the next few hours, I learned some things about Mescal. Not everything. She was guarded, cautious, every word measured and weighed before she spoke it. But I learned that her English was better than she'd first let on. She'd learned it from missionaries, she said, though her mouth twisted when she said the word, like it tasted bitter. I learned that she'd been living with her family, what was left of it, on the reservation to the east. But things had gotten bad. Food was scarce. The agent was corrupt. Men had come looking for girls to adopt them into white families, which everyone knew was a lie. They wanted servants, slaves, worse. She'd run. Some of her family had run with her, but they'd gotten separated in the night. She'd been on her own for 3 days when the men found her. She didn't know how they'd tracked her. Maybe she'd left a sign. Maybe someone had talked. But they'd been closing in on her since dawn. "I stole from them," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Food. It was wrong, but I was hungry." I shook my head. Stealing food when you're starving isn't wrong, it's survival. She looked at me like I'd said something remarkable. Maybe to her I had. Maybe she'd never heard a white person say that before. Maybe she'd only heard the opposite, that she and her people were thieves, savages, less than human. I wrapped her arm in clean bandages, dabbing the wound with iodine. It was a knife cut, deep but clean, and I didn't think it would get infected if we kept it clean. She flinched when the iodine hit, but she didn't make a sound, not even a gasp. I started to wonder what kind of life she'd lived that she'd learned to take pain in silence like that. "You can stay here," I said when I'd finished with her arm, "until you're better, until you figure out where you want to go." She stared at me. "Why, you don't know me. I am Apache. I could steal from you like I stole from them." "Could you? I figure you could, but I don't think you will." "Why not?" I looked at her then, really looked at her. At the stubborn set of her jaw, at the fierce pride in her eyes, at the way she held herself, ready to fight or flee at any moment but still holding her ground, still refusing to show weakness. "Because you're not a thief," I said. "You're a survivor, there's a difference." She looked away, and for just a moment I saw something break in her expression. Something that had been held together by sheer willpower, crumbling at the edges. Then she pulled it back together, locked it down, and when she looked at me again, the flint was back. "I will repay you," she said. "Somehow I do not take charity." "Fine," I said. "You can help out around here. There's plenty of work on a ranch. You can earn your keep." She nodded, a single decisive motion. "That is acceptable." I didn't tell her that I had no idea what I was doing, that I was breaking about a dozen laws by harboring her, that if those men came back, I couldn't protect her, that I was terrified too. I just smiled and showed her where she could sleep, and tried to pretend that everything was going to be all right. The next few days were strange, strange and beautiful and terrifying all at once. Mescal kept to herself mostly, disappearing into the corners of the ranch during the day and coming back to the house at night. She spoke to me when she had to, answering my questions with short, careful answers, but volunteering nothing. I found myself watching her, watching the way she moved through the world like she was part of it, not just passing through. The way she could track a rabbit across stone. The way she knew where the water was, even when the creek beds were dry. The way she could read the land like I read a book, seeing things I'd missed for 11 years. "How do you do that?" I asked her one afternoon, after she'd pointed out a spring I didn't know existed. "How do you see it?" She considered the question for a long moment. Then she said, "Your eyes see the land as something outside you, something separate. My eyes see the land as something I am part of. When I look at the ground, I see where the water has been because I am water. When I look at the sky, I see where the rain will come because I am rain. It is not seeing, it is remembering." I didn't understand it, not really, but I felt it in a way I couldn't explain. The way she talked about the land made me feel like I'd been blind my whole life and only just now realized it. She asked about my life too, about my past, my family, why I'd come to this place. I told her about my wife, who died of fever 5 years ago, about how we'd moved out here thinking we could make a new start, build something from nothing, about how she'd gotten sick and I'd been helpless to save her. "You were alone," Mescal said. "It wasn't a question." "Yeah, for a long time." "You are still alone." I didn't answer that. I couldn't, because she was right. I'd spent 5 years alone, surrounded by cows and dust, and the ghosts of a life I'd once dreamed about. I'd built walls around myself, walls I hadn't even realized were there until this girl looked at me with her flinty eyes and saw right through them. "You are not alone now," she said. "That is something." And she went back to her work, leaving me standing there with my heart pounding and my throat tight. The days passed. The men didn't come back. I started to think maybe they'd given up, moved on to other prey. Maybe I was in the clear. Maybe Mescal could stay and help and we could figure out some kind of life together. A strange life, an unlikely life, but something. I was wrong. 3 weeks after she'd arrived, the first body showed up. I found it in the south pasture near the fence line. It was one of my cattle, a steer I'd raised from a calf, a good-natured brute with a white patch over its eye. It was dead, but it hadn't died from sickness or old age or even wolf attack. It had been killed, deliberately, systematically. The cuts were too precise to be random, too careful. Someone had taken their time with this, had done it with purpose. And as I stood there, staring at the corpse in the morning light, I realized something that made my blood run cold. The cuts were in a pattern, a symbol, one I'd never seen before, but somehow I knew what it meant. It was a warning, a message. They hadn't given up, they'd been waiting, watching, and now they were telling me that they knew. I ran back to the house, my lungs burning, my heart racing. Mescal was in the kitchen, grinding corn for bread. She took one look at my face and dropped the stone. "What is it?" I told her everything, the steer, the symbol, the message I was sure it contained. She went pale, all the color draining from her face, but she didn't look scared. She looked angry, furious. Her hands balled into fists at her sides and her eyes flashed with a fire I hadn't seen before. "They know I am here," she said. "They are telling you to give me up, or they will destroy everything you have." "I'm not giving you up," I said. "Not to them, not to anyone." She looked at me, and for a moment the anger faded. In its place was something else, something soft and vulnerable and terrifying in its honesty. "Daniel," she said, "they will kill you, they will kill us both. You cannot stop them, they are many and we are two. You do not owe me this, I am nothing to you." "You're not nothing," I said. "You're not nothing at all." She stared at me, and then, for the first time since I'd met her, she smiled. It was a small smile, barely there, but it transformed her face, made her look like what she was, a young girl who'd been through too much and still managed to find something worth smiling about. "Then we will fight," she said, "together as one." I should have said no, should have done the smart thing, the safe thing, the thing that would keep me alive and my ranch intact. But I looked into her eyes, those flinty eyes that had seen so much pain and still held so much fire, and I knew I couldn't. "Together," I said. I didn't know what I was agreeing to, didn't know the cost, didn't know the blood that was already soaking into the ground, the lives that were about to be changed forever. I just knew that when an Apache girl burst across my land in terror, something had started that I couldn't stop, something that would change everything. And I was right. An Apache girl burst across his land in terror. What followed changed the ranch forever. The stand. The days that followed the discovery of the dead steer were unlike anything I'd ever experienced on that ranch. The land itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something to happen. Even the cattle felt it. They'd crowd together in the center of the pasture, lowing nervously, their eyes always scanning the horizon. My horse, a big bay gelding I'd raised from a colt, wouldn't settle in the corral. He'd pace and snort and roll his eyes at shadows. And Mescal changed, too. The cautious, guarded girl who'd emerged from the stall that first morning was gone. In her place was something harder, sharper, more dangerous. She moved differently now, not like someone trying to hide, but like someone preparing to fight. Every motion was deliberate. Every glance was a threat assessment. She taught herself to become invisible in plain sight, and I watched her do it with a mixture of awe and fear. "What are we going to do?" I asked her one evening as the sun bled orange and gold across the western sky. We were sitting on the porch, she on the steps, me in my worn-out rocking chair. The air was cooling, the cicadas beginning their nightly chorus. It should have been peaceful. It wasn't. "We are going to survive," she said simply. "That is what we do. That is what we have always done." "But they know you're here. They're going to come for us." "Yes." She didn't look at me. Her eyes were fixed on the distant mountains, the place where the Apache had once roamed free. "But they do not know the land like we do. They do not know how to fight on this ground. That is our advantage." I wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that 6 armed men didn't care about advantages, didn't care about the land, didn't care about anything except their own twisted sense of justice. But I kept quiet, because she was right. She'd been surviving her whole life. I'd been surviving for 5 years. She knew things I didn't. "Teach me," I said. "Teach me how to fight like you do." She turned to look at me then, her dark eyes searching my face, looking for something. I didn't know what. Doubt maybe, fear, hesitation. She found whatever she was looking for because she nodded slowly. "Tomorrow," she said, "at dawn we will begin. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the creak and settle of the old house, thinking about all the ways this could go wrong, all the ways I could die, all the ways Mescal could die, and how I'd never forgive myself if that happened. Somewhere around midnight I heard her get up, heard the soft pad of her bare feet across the floor, the click of the door opening and closing. I got up and looked out the window. She was standing in the yard, her face tilted up toward the moon. Her lips were moving, but I couldn't hear what she was saying. A prayer, maybe, or a song, something old and sacred and private. I watched her for a long time, watched the moonlight silver her black hair, make her look like a spirit, a ghost, something not quite of this world. And I felt something shift inside me, something I didn't have words for. I went back to bed and didn't sleep any better. At dawn, we began. She took me to the edge of the property, to the place where the mesquite and creosote thickened into true desert. She pointed to the ground, to the tracks and signs I'd always overlooked. "You see this?" She knelt, her fingers tracing a faint line in the dirt. "This is where the coyote passed last night. He was hunting. He found nothing, so he moved on. The land tells you everything if you know how to read it." I knelt beside her, squinting at the ground. "I just see dirt." "That is your problem. You see what is on top. You do not see what is underneath, what has come before, what will come next." She looked at me, and there was something almost like pity in her eyes. "You are like a man who reads only one word on a page and thinks he knows the whole story." She taught me to track, to find water where there was none, to move silently through the brush, to use the terrain for cover, to become part of the landscape instead of standing out against it. She taught me to read the weather in the clouds, to find shelter in the rocks, to understand the patterns of the animals and the wind and the dust. Most of all, she taught me patience. The kind of patience that comes from knowing that the world moves on its own time, not yours. The kind of patience that lets you wait for hours, days, weeks, for the right moment to act. "You are learning," she said after a week of these sessions. "Slowly, but learning." "Gee, thanks," I said, wiping the sweat from my brow. "You really know how to make a man feel good about himself." She smiled, that small, rare smile that transformed her face. "You are good man, Daniel Hartwell, you care. That is why you will survive." I didn't tell her that I wasn't sure I wanted to survive, that sometimes, in the darkest hours of the night, I thought about just letting them come, letting them take me, giving up the fight and going to join my wife in whatever came next. But I didn't, because when I looked at Mescal, I saw something worth fighting for, something that made the struggle meaningful. And so I fought. They came on a Tuesday. I remember because I'd been planning to ride into town for supplies, something I'd been putting off for weeks. I was in the barn, saddling my horse, when Mescal appeared in the doorway. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. "They are coming," she said. "5 of them, they will be here within the hour." I felt my stomach drop. "How do you know?" She pointed to the ridge line above the ranch. "I saw them, moving through the rocks. They think they are hidden, they are not." I dropped the saddle and grabbed my rifle. The old Winchester I'd inherited from my father, the one I'd never fired at anything bigger than a coyote. It felt heavy in my hands, heavy and wrong and not enough. "How many?" I asked. "You said 5. 5 that I saw. There may be more. They are smart enough to send scouts ahead." I nodded, forcing myself to breathe, forcing myself to think. Okay, what's the plan?" Mescal looked at me, and I saw the fear in her eyes. But I saw something else, too. Something fierce and determined and absolutely unbreakable. "We do not fight them head-on," she said. "We use the land, we use what you have learned. We make them come to us, and we make them pay for every step." She moved then, a blur of motion, grabbing a bag from the corner of the barn. I recognized it as the pack she'd brought with her, the one that had been sitting untouched since she'd arrived. She pulled out a bow, a beautiful thing, made of wood and sinew and decorated with symbols I didn't understand. and a quiver of arrows, their tips sharpened to needle points. "Where did you get those?" I asked. "I have always had them," she said. "I hid them in case I needed to fight." She strung the bow with practiced ease, her fingers moving like they'd done it 1,000 times, which they probably had. She was a warrior, this girl, a warrior in a girl's body, carrying the weight of her people's history on her shoulders. "Stay close to me," she said. "Do not do anything foolish. Follow my lead." "Yes, ma'am," I said, and I meant it. We moved out of the barn and into the desert, disappearing into the brush and rocks. I followed her, trying to step where she stepped, trying to be as quiet as she was. It wasn't easy. She moved like smoke, like wind, like something that didn't quite touch the ground. I moved like a cow on ice. But I followed, and that was what mattered. We took positions above the ranch where we could see the buildings and the yard and the approach. The men came just as Mescal had said they would, 5 of them all on horseback. I recognized the bearded man from before. He was in the lead, his rifle across his saddle. Behind him, 4 others, hard men, dangerous men. They reined in at the edge of my yard just as they had the first time. But this time, they didn't wait. This time they dismounted and moved toward the house, their weapons drawn. "Spread out," the bearded man shouted. "Find her, and find the rancher who's hiding her." My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear anything else. I looked at Mescal, who was crouched beside me. She was perfectly still, perfectly calm. Her eyes were fixed on the men below, and her fingers were wrapped around the bowstring. "Wait," she whispered. "Let them get closer. Let them think they are safe." I waited. Every second felt like an hour. I watched them fan out, watched them approach the house, watched them kick open the door and disappear inside. Watched them come back out, shaking their heads, looking toward the barn. The bearded man pointed. "Check the barn." 2 of the men started toward the barn. The other 3 stayed in the yard, watching, waiting. I felt Mescal shift beside me, her body tensing. "Now," she whispered, "before they find the tracks." She stood up, drew her bow, and fired. The arrow flew true, striking one of the men in the shoulder. He screamed, dropped his rifle, and fell to the ground. The other man spun, trying to figure out where the shot had come from. But Mescal was already moving. She'd strung another arrow before the first one hit the ground, and she was moving sideways, firing again, this time striking the second man in the thigh. He went down with a howl that echoed across the ranch. The men in the yard were shouting now, firing wildly in our direction. Bullets whizzed past us, pinging off the rocks, sending up puffs of dust. I ducked, pressing myself flat against the ground. "Daniel," Mescal called, "now shoot." I raised my rifle and fired. It was a terrible shot, wide by at least 10 feet. But it made them duck, made them take cover, gave Mescal time to fire another arrow. This one hit the bearded man's horse, which reared and screamed and took off running, carrying its owner out of the fight. And just like that, we had them. Disorganized, scattered, wounded. They didn't know where we were. They couldn't coordinate. They were just men with guns, firing blindly, and we were ghosts in the rocks. For the next hour, we picked them apart. A shot here, an arrow there. We didn't kill any of them, not yet, but we made them suffer. We made them bleed. We made them understand that they weren't the hunters anymore. They were the hunted. By the time the sun was high in the sky, 4 of the 5 men were down, wounded but alive. Only the bearded man was still on his feet, and he was backing away from the ranch, his eyes wide with fear. "Stop," he shouted. "We're leaving, we're going." He mounted one of the abandoned horses and rode off, not looking back, leaving his men behind, leaving them to us. I watched him go, my rifle still raised. I could have shot him, should have shot him, but something held me back, something that didn't want to become that kind of man, even in defense of what was right. "Let him go," Mescal said. She was standing beside me, her bow still drawn, her eyes tracking the fleeing horseman. "He will not come back. He knows now that he cannot win." I lowered my rifle, my arms trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. What about the others? She looked down at the men in the yard, the ones who'd been shot, who were lying on the ground, groaning and bleeding. We will send them away, with a message. Tell them to spread the word that this land is protected, that anyone who comes here looking for Apache blood will find only their own. I nodded, too tired to argue. We descended from the rocks and took care of the wounded men. We dressed their wounds and gave them water and sent them stumbling back toward the town, their tails between their legs. I had no illusions that they'd be grateful. Men like that don't feel gratitude. They only feel shame, and shame curdles into hatred and revenge. But it didn't matter. Not then. Not with Mescal standing beside me, her face streaked with dust and sweat, her hands still trembling from the fight. She looked like a warrior, like something ancient and sacred and untouchable. I looked at her and felt something I'd thought was gone forever, something that had died with my wife, that I'd buried in the ground beside her, something that made me want to protect this fierce, beautiful girl with everything I had. We went back to the house and sat on the porch, too exhausted to do anything else. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of fire and blood. Appropriate, I thought. We'd shed blood today. We'd fought and won and survived. They will come back, Mescal said quietly. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday. They will not forget. I know, I said, but we'll be ready. We'll always be ready. She looked at me, and there was something in her eyes that I'd never seen before. A softening, a vulnerability. She reached out and touched my hand just briefly, just enough for me to feel the warmth of her skin. Thank you, she said, for fighting, for staying. You don't have to thank me, I said. I'd do it again, 1,000 times. She smiled, that rare, beautiful smile, and for a moment everything felt right, felt good, felt like we could actually make this work. But I was wrong about that too. Because the next morning, I found the second body. It wasn't a steer this time. It was one of the men from the posse, the one I'd shot in the shoulder. I found him at the edge of the property, lying in a pool of his own blood. His throat had been cut from ear to ear, so deep that his head was nearly severed. And beside him, carved into the dirt, was the same symbol I'd seen on the steer. But this time there was a word beneath it, a word in English, written with something sharp and deliberate. Traitor. I stared at it, my blood turning cold. This wasn't the work of a posse looking for revenge. This was something else, something personal, something that had been planned, orchestrated by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. I ran back to the house, my heart pounding. Mescal was in the kitchen making breakfast. She took one look at my face and went still. What happened? I told her. She listened without expression, her face a mask of stone. But I saw her hands tremble slightly, the only sign of the fear she was feeling. Someone killed him, she said. Someone who wanted to send a message, not to us, to the others. What do you mean? She looked at me and her eyes were dark and troubled. The men we fought, they were not the only ones. There is someone else, someone who wants something different, someone who wants to destroy everything. Who, I asked, who would do this? She shook her head slowly. I do not know, but I think I know where to find out. I looked at her, at the hard set of her jaw, the fire in her eyes. I knew what she was going to say before she said it. I have to go back, she said, to the reservation. There are people there who know things, who might be able to tell us what is happening. You can't, I said. It's too dangerous. Those men might be waiting for you. Daniel, she stepped closer to me, her face inches from mine. This is not about me anymore. This is about something bigger, something that affects all of us. The Apache. The ranchers. Everyone. There is a shadow moving across this land, and I have to find out what it is. I wanted to argue, wanted to lock her in the house and throw away the key. But I looked in her eyes, and I saw the same determination I'd seen on the first day. The same unbreakable spirit that had brought her here in the first place. Then I'm coming with you, I said. She started to protest, but I cut her off. I'm not arguing about this. You're not going alone, not after what happened. Either we go together or we don't go at all. She stared at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded slowly. Together, she said, as one. We left the ranch that afternoon on the two best horses we had. I locked the house and the barn, not knowing if I'd ever see them again. Mescal led the way, her eyes scanning the horizon, her hand never far from her bow. We rode in silence for hours, through the desert and the rocks and the hidden places that only she knew. I followed her, trusting her completely, not knowing where we were going or what we'd find. And as the sun set on the first day of our journey, I realized that everything had changed. The life I'd known was gone, replaced by something I couldn't yet understand. But I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't just a rancher anymore. I was something else, something that had been forged in fire and blood and desperation. I was a survivor, and I would fight for Mescal and her people until my last breath. An Apache girl burst across his land in terror. What followed changed the ranch forever. The journey to the reservation took 3 days. 3 days of riding through country I thought I knew, only to discover I'd been blind my whole life. Mescal led me through canyons I'd never seen, past springs that weren't on any map, along trails that seemed to vanish and reappear like magic. She moved through the landscape like it was her own body, and I followed, humbled and awed and more grateful than I could say. On the third evening, we crested a ridge and looked down on a valley I'd only heard about in whispers. The reservation, a collection of shabby buildings scattered like broken teeth across the desert floor. There were people there, Apache people, going about their lives in the fading light. I could see children playing, women cooking, men gathered around a central fire. It looked peaceful. It looked nothing like the stories I'd been told. "They will not welcome you," Mescal said quietly. "Not at first. You are a white man. You are the enemy." "I understand," I said. "I'll stay back, wait for you." She shook her head. "No, you come with me. You show them that you are different, that you are not like the others." I wanted to argue, but I knew better. Mescal had her reasons for everything she did, even when I didn't understand them. So I followed her down into the valley, into the heart of a people who had every reason to hate me. The reception was exactly what I'd expected. Cold stares, whispered words, hands that moved toward weapons when I got too close. Mescal spoke to them in their language, her voice calm and steady, and I watched their expressions shift from hostility to confusion to something that might have been respect. She was telling them about me, about what I'd done, about how I'd protected her, fought for her, risked everything to keep her safe. When she finished, there was a long silence. Then an old man stepped forward. He was ancient, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, his eyes bright and sharp despite his age. He studied me for a long moment, his gaze boring into mine like he was looking straight through to my soul. "You are the rancher," he said. His English was accented but clear. "The one who fought for our daughter." "I am," I said. "I did what was right." "Right?" He repeated the word like it was foreign, like he was testing its weight. "You say you did what was right, but you do not know what is right. Not yet. Not truly." I opened my mouth to argue, but Mescal put a hand on my arm, silencing me. She nodded to the old man, saying something in Apache. He nodded back, then gestured for us to follow. He led us to a small hut at the edge of the village, a place that smelled of smoke and herbs and old secrets. Inside, there was a fire pit, and the old man sat down beside it, motioning for us to do the same. "Your name is Daniel," he said. "I am Chief Nanton. I have led this people for 40 winters. I have seen many things, some good, some terrible. I have seen the white men come and take our land, our children, our dignity. I have seen them try to erase us from the earth." His voice was calm, but I could hear the anger underneath it. An old anger, a deep anger, the kind that had been passed down through generations. "I'm not like that," I said. "I don't want to take anything from you. I just want to understand." "Understand," he laughed, a bitter sound. "You cannot understand. You are a white man. You were born into a world of plenty. We were born into a world of struggle. You cannot understand what it means to be hunted on your own land, to watch your children starve, to see your culture destroyed one piece at a time." Mescal spoke up then, her voice sharp and urgent. She said something that made the old man's eyes widen. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw something shift in his expression, something that might have been hope. "She tells me you have a good heart," he said. "She tells me you fought for her when you had nothing to gain. She tells me you are different." "I'm just a man," I said. "I'm not special." "You are special," Nanton said, "because you chose to see. Most white men choose not to see. They look at us and see nothing. You looked at Mescal and saw a person. That is rare. That is precious." I didn't know what to say to that, so I stayed quiet and let him talk. He told me about the history of his people, the true history, the one that wasn't in the books or the newspapers. He told me about the massacres, the broken treaties, the endless march of suffering that had brought them to this place. He told me about the children who'd been taken, the women who'd been violated, the men who'd been murdered for the crime of being born Apache. He told me about the shadow that was moving across the land. "There is a man," Nanton said, "a man of power. He wants to destroy us. Not just the Apache, but all the native peoples. He wants to make the land pure. He wants to erase us from history." "Who is he?" I asked. "I do not know his name. He hides behind others. He uses men like the ones who chased Mescal. He gives them money, weapons, purpose. They think they are fighting for their own cause. They do not realize they are pawns in a larger game." I thought about the men I'd fought, the ones I'd sent crawling back to town. They hadn't seemed like pawns. They'd seemed like real men with real hatred, real anger. But maybe that was the point. Maybe that was how this shadow worked, by finding men with darkness in their hearts and giving them permission to let it out. "What do we do?" I asked. "How do we stop him?" Nanton looked at me, and there was something almost like pity in his eyes. "You cannot stop him. He is too powerful. He has the government behind him, the army, the money. All you can do is survive. All we can do is survive." "That's not enough," I said. "Surviving isn't living. You deserve more than just survival." The old man smiled. It was a sad smile, but there was warmth in it too. "You are a good man, Daniel Hartwell, a foolish man, but a good one. You do not understand how the world works, but you want to. That is something." We talked for hours. Nanton and he told me stories of his youth, of the days before the reservation, when the Apache roamed free. He told me about the buffalo hunts, the great dances, the times when the world was full and abundant and there was enough for everyone. I listened, and I felt something breaking inside me. Something I'd held onto for so long I'd forgotten it was there. The belief that the world was fair, that history was simple, that right and wrong were clear and separate. Everything I'd been taught was wrong. Everything I'd believed was a lie. And I was only just beginning to understand how deep the lie went. In the middle of the night, Mescal came to me. She found me sitting outside the hut, staring up at the stars. The sky was impossibly clear, the Milky Way a river of light across the darkness. "You are troubled," she said, sitting down beside me. "I'm always troubled," I said. "Isn't that the default for men like me?" She laughed, a soft sound that made my heart ache. "You are funny, Daniel. You try to hide your pain with jokes, but I can see it. I can feel it." I looked at her strong profile silhouetted against the stars. "I don't know how to fix this," I said. "I don't know how to make it right." "You cannot fix it," she said. "It is too big, too old, too broken. All you can do is be here, be present, be willing to help when help is needed." "Is that enough?" She turned to look at me, her dark eyes gleaming in the starlight. "It is everything. Being willing to help is everything. Most people are not even willing to try." I felt something shift inside me. The same something I'd felt on the porch in the barn in the middle of the fight. Something that was growing stronger, more urgent, impossible to ignore. "I care about you," I said. The words came out before I could stop them, raw and honest and terrifying. "I care about you more than I've cared about anything in a long time." She stared at me, her expression unreadable. I braced myself for rejection, for anger, for the cold withdrawal I'd come to expect from her when things got too close. But instead she reached out and took my hand. Her fingers were warm and calloused, and they fit perfectly against mine. "I care about you too," she said. "That is why this is so hard." "What is hard?" She didn't answer for a long moment. She just sat there, holding my hand, staring up at the stars. Then she spoke, her voice so quiet I almost didn't hear her. "I have to leave again," she said. "I have to find the shadow. I have to stop him before he destroys everything." "No," I said. "No, you can't. It's too dangerous. You'll get yourself killed." "I will get myself killed if I stay here and do nothing. At least if I fight, there is a chance. A small chance, but a chance." "I'll come with you." "No." This time her voice was firm. "You are needed here. You are needed to protect the people, to be a bridge between our worlds. That is your purpose, Daniel. That is your destiny." I wanted to argue, wanted to scream and shout and demand that she let me come. But I looked into her eyes and I saw the truth there. She was right. She was always right. "Promise me you'll come back," I said. "Promise me you'll survive." She smiled that rare, beautiful smile. "I promise. I will come back to you, Daniel Hartwell. That is my promise to you. That is my vow." She kissed me then. A soft, gentle kiss that tasted like dust and smoke and the faintest hint of wildflowers. A kiss that promised everything and nothing, that held a world of meaning in a single moment. And then she was gone, disappearing into the darkness of the desert, leaving me alone with the stars and the silence and the ache in my heart. The days that followed were the longest of my life. I stayed at the reservation, helping where I could, learning what I could. The Apache people accepted me, slowly, cautiously, with the wariness of those who'd been burned too many times. But they accepted me. They saw that I was different, that I was trying, that I was willing to fight for them. I helped rebuild the school. I taught the children English, and they taught me Apache words in return. I learned to appreciate the rhythm of their lives, the way they moved through the world in harmony with the seasons and the animals and the land itself. And I waited. Every day I scanned the horizon, hoping to see Mescal's figure appear. Every night I prayed to whatever gods might be listening that she was safe, that she was alive, that she'd keep her promise and come back to me. The weeks passed, then a month, then two. I started to lose hope, started to think she'd died out there, alone and afraid, and that I'd never know what had happened to her. Then, on a cold October morning, she came back. I was in the school, teaching the children to write their names, when I heard shouting outside. I ran to the door and saw her riding into the village, her horse at a gallop, her face streaked with dust and blood. She was alive, she was hurt, but she was alive. I ran to her, catching her as she slid off the horse. She fell into my arms, her body trembling, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Daniel," she whispered, "I found him, I found the shadow." "Are you hurt?" I asked. "Are you okay?" "I am fine, I am better than fine." I stopped him. "He will never hurt anyone again." I held her close, feeling the warmth of her body against mine. "What happened? Tell me everything." She did. She told me about the weeks of tracking, following leads across the desert, through towns and cities and wilderness. She told me about the man she'd found, a wealthy businessman with connections to the government, with a vision of a pure white West where the natives had all been eliminated. She told me about the fight, the desperate struggle, the moment when she'd finally brought him down. She told me about the evidence she'd found, the proof of his crimes, the documents that would destroy him and his network forever. "He is dead," she said, "but his ideas will not die. There are others who think like him. There will always be others. But for now, for this moment, we are safe. I didn't know what to say. I just held her, grateful beyond words that she was back, that she was whole, that she'd survived. Don't ever do that again, I said. Don't leave like that. I can't. I can't do this without you. She looked at me and there was laughter in her eyes. You did fine without me. You are stronger than you know, Daniel Hartwell. You always have been. I don't feel strong, I said. I feel like I'm falling apart. Falling apart is how you put yourself back together. That is what makes you strong. That is what makes you human. I kissed her then in front of everyone. I didn't care who saw or what they thought. I just needed to feel her lips against mine, to know that she was real, that this wasn't another dream I'd wake up from. She kissed me back, and I felt the world shift around us, felt the past and present and future all converging in that single moment. I love you, I said. She smiled. I know I love you too. That was 5 years ago. 5 years of living in between two worlds, of fighting and healing and growing. 5 years of watching Mescal become a leader of her people, a bridge between the old ways and the new. The ranch is gone now. I gave it up, sold it to a young couple who wanted to start a life in the desert. It hurt, letting it go. But it was the right thing to do. My life is here now with Mescal and her people, with the land that has become my home. We have children now, 2 of them, a boy and a girl. They speak both languages, move through both worlds, carry the best of both cultures in their hearts. They are the future, and when I look at them, I feel hope. But I still remember that morning. The morning when an Apache girl burst across my land in terror. The morning that changed everything. I remember the sound of her horse's hooves, the terror in her eyes, the blood on her arm. I remember the moment I decided to help her, not knowing what it would cost, not caring. I remember the fight, the pain, the loss, the moment when I thought I'd lost her forever. And I remember the kiss, the promise, the love that grew out of the ashes of everything I'd believed. I'm not the same man I was 5 years ago. I'm not the rancher, the widower, the lonely soul trying to find meaning in a world that had taken everything from him. I'm something else, something more. I'm a survivor, a partner, a father, a friend. I'm a man who learned to see, truly see, the people and the world around him. And that makes all the difference.